The chief's son believed talking to eagles made him invincible, until the day his arrogance brought a curse that only he could break. But would anyone trust him to save them? In the vast plains where the Lakota people roamed freely under endless skies, there lived a young man named Chayton, whose name meant falcon in the ancient tongue. But Chayton was no ordinary member of the tribe. He was the son of Chief Standing Bear, the most respected leader the Lakota had known in 3 generations. From the day Chayton could walk, it was clear that the spirits had marked him as special. While other children played with sticks and stones, Chayton would stand motionless for hours, his dark eyes fixed on the sky, watching the eagles soar above the sacred Black Hills. The tribal elders whispered that he had been born under the sign of the eagle spirit, a blessing that came perhaps once in a century. When Chayton reached his 13th winter, the impossible happened. During his vision quest, as he sat alone on Thunder Butte without food or water for 4 days and nights, the eagles began to speak to him. At first, it was just whispers on the wind, voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. But as the hours passed and his spirit opened to the sacred realm, the voices became clear. The golden eagles, the bald eagles, even the mighty war eagles that nested in the highest peaks, they all spoke to him as if he were one of their own. Young Falcon, the great eagle spirit had said to him in that vision, "You have been chosen to bridge the world of earthwalkers and sky dancers. Through you, the wisdom of the air will guide your people to prosperity and protection." When Chayton returned from his vision quest, he was forever changed. The power that flowed through him was undeniable. He could call eagles from miles away with a simple whistle. He could understand their warnings of approaching storms, enemy war parties, or the best hunting grounds. Most remarkably, he could see through their eyes, soaring high above the plains to scout for danger or opportunity. Chief Standing Bear was proud of his son's gift, but he was also wise enough to be concerned. "Power without wisdom is like a fire without boundaries," he told Chayton one evening as they sat by the sacred fire. "It may warm you or may consume everything you love." But Chayton was young, and the intoxication of his abilities made his father's words seem like the fears of an old man who didn't understand the new age that was dawning. "Father," Chayton replied, his voice carrying the confidence that comes from never having truly failed at anything, "the eagle spirit chose me for a reason. I can see farther than any scout, hunt better than any warrior, and the sky itself tells me its secrets. Our people will never want for anything again." And for several years, it seemed that Chayton was right. Under his guidance, the Lakota of Standing Bear's band prospered like never before. Chayton's eagles would lead hunting parties to massive buffalo herds hidden in distant valleys. They would warn of approaching enemy raids days before any human scout could detect them. They would find fresh water sources during droughts and safe passage through dangerous territories. The young women of the tribe looked at Chayton with admiration and longing. The warriors sought his counsel before every important decision. Children followed him around the camp, hoping to catch a glimpse of the magnificent birds that would descend from the heavens at his call. But with each success, with each demonstration of his power, Chayton's humility eroded like soil in a flash flood. He began to see himself not as a servant of the eagle spirit, but as its earthly incarnation. He started to believe that the gifts he had been given were proof of his superiority over other men. Most dangerously, he began to think that the rules and customs that governed the rest of the tribe did not apply to him. It started with small things. Chayton would take the best portions of meat from successful hunts without being offered them by the elders, claiming that his contribution to the hunt's success entitled him to first choice. He would interrupt the tribal council meetings, insisting that his eagle-given wisdom was more valuable than the collective judgment of the experienced leaders. When other young warriors questioned his actions, Chayton would demonstrate his power by calling down a dozen eagles to perch around him, their fierce eyes and sharp talons making his point more effectively than any words could. "The spirits themselves have chosen me," he would say, his voice carrying an edge of contempt for those who dare question him. Would you argue with the will of the eagle spirit? Chief Standing Bear watched his son's transformation with growing unease. The wise old leader had seen pride destroy stronger men than Chayton, and he recognized the signs all too well. One evening, as the tribe gathered for the telling of sacred stories, Standing Bear pulled his son aside. "Chayton," he said quietly, "you are walking a dangerous path. The gifts you have been given are meant to serve the people, not to elevate you above them. Chayton's response was like a slap across his father's weathered face. Perhaps, Chayton said with a cold smile, it is time for new leadership. The old ways served us when we were weak, but I have made us strong. I have made us the most prosperous band on the entire plains. Maybe it's time for someone with real power to guide our people into the future. The words hung in the air between father and son like poison smoke. Standing Bear felt his heart break as he realized that the son he loved had become a stranger, corrupted by the very gifts that were meant to bless him. "You are no longer my son," Standing Bear said finally, his voice heavy with sorrow. "The Chayton I raised would never speak such words. Until you remember who you truly are, you are banished from this tribe." Chayton laughed, a sound as harsh as a crow's call. "Banish me," he said mockingly. "Old man, I could call down 1,000 eagles to darken the sky. I could have them tear apart anyone who opposes me. Your banishment means nothing to someone with my power." But even as he spoke the words, Chayton felt something shift in the spiritual realm around him. The connection he had always felt with the eagles grew distant, like a fire banking down the coals. "If that is how you choose to use the gifts you were given," Standing Bear said with quiet dignity, "then you will discover that the spirits can take away what they have given just as easily as they bestowed it." That night, Chayton left the tribal camp, his heart burning with anger and resentment. He would show them all. He would use his power to build his own band, one that would eclipse his father's in every way. The eagles would help him find followers among the scattered groups of plains dwellers. He would become the greatest chief the Lakota had ever known. But when morning came and Chayton sent out his call to the eagles, only silence answered him. He tried again, using the special whistle that had never failed to bring the great birds flocking to his side. Nothing. The sky remained empty except for a few ordinary hawks that paid him no attention whatsoever. Panic began to creep into Chayton's heart. He climbed the highest hill in the area and called out with all his strength, using every technique the eagle spirit had taught him. But the sky remained stubbornly vacant of his former allies. It was then that he heard the voice. Not the voices of individual eagles, but the great eagle spirit itself, speaking to him for the first time since his original vision quest. "Chayton, son of Standing Bear," the voice echoed from the vast emptiness above. "You have forgotten the first law of all gifts from the spirit world. They are given to serve, not to rule. You have used the sacred connection for your own elevation, rather than the welfare of your people." "But I did serve them," Chayton protested. "I made them the most successful band on the plains." "You served yourself," the eagle spirit replied coldly. "You used my children as tools to feed your own pride. You claimed credit for their wisdom as if it were your own. Most shamefully, you threatened to use them as weapons against your own people." The air around Chayton began to grow cold, despite the warm sun overhead. "Therefore," the eagle spirit continued, "your gift is suspended. You will no longer hear the voices of the sky dancers or see through their eyes. You are cut off from the realm of air and wind." "No!" Chayton cried out desperately. "Please, I can change. I can be better." "Perhaps," the eagle spirit said, its voice growing fainter. "There is one way to restore what has been lost. But the price is higher than you can imagine, and the task more difficult than you have ever faced." "Tell me," Chayton begged. "I'll do anything." "Your people face a great danger," the eagle spirit explained. "A terrible storm is coming. Not a storm of wind and rain, but a storm of war. 3 enemy tribes have joined together to attack your father's band. They believe that with you gone, the Lakota are vulnerable." Chayton's blood ran cold. Despite his anger toward his father, the thought of his people being destroyed was unbearable. "The war party is already moving," the eagle spirit continued. "They will reach your people in 3 days. Only you can save them, because only you know the secret paths through the Badlands that would allow a small force to circle behind the enemy and attack them from the rear." "Then I'll go to them immediately," Chayton said. "I'll warn them and lead a counterattack." "It is not so simple," the eagle spirit said sadly. "Your father has declared you banished. The warriors will not follow you. The council will not listen to you. And you have no eagles to prove that your warnings come from the spirit world. Chayton felt despair wash over him like a dark flood. Then how can I save them? You must convince them through your actions, not your words, the eagle spirit replied. You must prove that you have learned humility, that you understand the true meaning of service, and you must be willing to sacrifice everything, including your life, for people who may never forgive you. The spirit's presence began to fade from the sky. If you succeed, came the final whisper, if you save your people through genuine sacrifice and humility, then perhaps a connection can be restored. But know this, you will never again be the same man who spoke casually with eagles. Wisdom earned through suffering is deeper than power granted through blessing. And then Chayton was alone on the hilltop, facing the most difficult choice of his life. For the rest of that day and all through the night, Chayton wrestled with his options. He could simply disappear, leave the plains forever, and start a new life far from the Lakota lands. His people had cast him out. After all, why should he risk his life for those who no longer wanted him? But every time he started to walk away, he would think of young Two Hawks, who had followed him around the camp with such admiration. He would remember Laughing Water, the girl he had hoped to marry someday. He would see his father's weathered face, stern but loving, even in their final confrontation. By dawn, his decision was made. Chayton set out across the plains, pushing himself harder than he ever had before. Without eagles to scout for him or guide his path, he had to rely on half-remembered lessons from his childhood, tracking skills he had always supplemented with his supernatural abilities. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs felt like they would collapse beneath him. He navigated by the sun and stars, hoping desperately that he was heading in the right direction. Several times he lost his way and had to backtrack, precious hours slipping away as the enemy war party drew closer to his people. On the morning of the second day, Chayton finally spotted the familiar smoke rising from his father's camp, but his relief was short-lived. As he approached the perimeter, two warriors stepped out to block his path, their weapons ready. "Chayton," said Black Wolf, who had once been his close friend, "you are not welcome here. Chief Standing Bear has declared you banished." "I know," Chayton said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion and thirst. "But I have urgent news. A war party of 3 tribes is coming. They'll be here by tomorrow evening." Black Wolf and the other warrior, Gray Hawk, exchanged skeptical glances. "And how would you know this?" Gray Hawk asked suspiciously. "Your eagle spirits tell you?" Chayton felt heat rise in his cheeks. "No, I overheard them planning while I was hunting in the eastern valleys." It was a lie, and he could see that both warriors suspected as much. The eastern valleys were nowhere near the route Chayton would have taken when he left the camp. "We will report your words to the chief," Black Wolf said finally. "But you cannot enter the camp. You must wait here." Chayton nodded, understanding that he had no choice. He settled down on the ground and waited, his heart heavy with the knowledge that time was running out. Hours passed before Black Wolf returned, and his expression was grim. "The chief says that without proof, he cannot risk the safety of the tribe by moving based on the word of a banished son, who has already proven himself untrustworthy," Black Wolf reported. "He says that if you truly have information about an enemy force, you must provide evidence." "What kind of evidence?" Chayton asked desperately. "Something that proves you have actually seen this war party with your own eyes," Black Wolf replied. "A weapon, a piece of clothing, something that could only accompany the enemy." Chayton's heart sank. To get such evidence, he would have to actually find the enemy war party and get close enough to steal something from them. It was an almost impossible task for a lone man, especially one without supernatural aid. But it was the only way. That night, Chayton set out again, this time heading toward the most likely route the enemy would take to reach his father's camp. He moved through the darkness like a shadow, using every stealth technique he had ever learned. Just before dawn, he found them. The war party was even larger than the eagle spirit had indicated. Nearly 100 warriors from the Crow, Shoshone, and Pawnee tribes, all traditional enemies of the Lakota. They were well-armed and moving with the confidence of men who believed they were approaching an easy victory. Chayton watched them from a concealed position on a ridge above their camp, his mind racing as he tried to figure out how to get close enough to steal something without being detected. The answer came when he noticed that one of the Crow warriors had hung his war shirt on a nearby tree branch to dry after the morning's river crossing. The shirt was decorated with distinctive beadwork that would be immediately recognizable to any Lakota warrior. Waiting until the camp settled into the quiet routine of midday rest, Chayton began his approach. Every step had to be perfect. One broken twig, one shifted stone, and he would be discovered and killed before he could warn his people. It took him nearly 2 hours to cover the 100 yards to the tree. His heart was pounding so loudly, he was sure the entire enemy camp could hear it. Sweat dripped into his eyes despite the cool mountain air. Finally, his fingers closed around the war shirt. He had it, but as he turned to leave, his foot dislodged a small rock that rolled down the slope and struck a sleeping warrior on the head. The man jerked awake with a startled cry, his eyes immediately fixing on Chayton's retreating form. "Lakota spy!" the warrior shouted, leaping to his feet and grabbing his weapons. The entire camp erupted in activity. Warriors swarmed toward Chayton's position like angry wasps from a disturbed nest. Chayton ran. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life. The stolen war shirt clutched in his hands, arrows whistling past his head, and war cries echoing behind him. The enemy warriors pursued him for miles, their fury driving them to extraordinary effort. But Chayton had one advantage: desperation born of love for his people. He pushed his body beyond its limits, drawing on reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of flight, his pursuers gave up the chase and turned back to their camp. Chayton collapsed behind a boulder, gasping for air, his body shaking with exhaustion. But he had the proof he needed. It was nearly sunset when Chayton stumbled back to the perimeter of his father's camp, the Crow war shirt in his hands. This time, when Black Wolf saw what he carried, the warrior's expression changed to one of alarm. "By the spirits," Black Wolf breathed, recognizing the distinctive beadwork. "This is from Chief Ironclaw's personal guard." "Where did you get this?" "From their camp, half a day's ride to the east," Chayton gasped. "Nearly 100 warriors. They'll be here by tomorrow night." Black Wolf needed no further convincing. He raced into the camp to alert Chief Standing Bear, while Greyhawk helped the exhausted Chayton to a nearby stream to drink and rest. Within minutes, the entire camp was in motion. Warriors gathered their weapons. Women began packing essential belongings, and scouts were dispatched to confirm Chayton's report. But when Chief Standing Bear approached his son, the old leader's face was a mask of conflicted emotions. "You have done a great service for our people," Standing Bear said formally. "But that does not erase the words you spoke or the path you chose. You are still banished from this tribe." Chayton nodded, understanding his father's position. "I know, Father. I don't ask for forgiveness. I only ask that you let me help defend our people one last time." Standing Bear studied his son's face for a long moment, seeing something there that had been missing for too long. Genuine humility. "Very well," the chief said finally, "but you will follow orders like any other warrior. Your past gifts do not make you special here." "I understand," Chayton replied. The war council that followed was unlike any Chayton had ever witnessed. Without his eagles to provide intelligence, he had to rely on his own observations and the reports of the scouts. It was clear that the enemy force was too large to defeat in direct combat, especially since many of the tribe's best warriors were away on a trading expedition. "We must retreat," Council Windwalker, the tribe's war chief. "Take the women and children into the deep canyons where the enemy cannot follow with such a large force. And abandon everything we've built here," protested Strong Elk. "This is our sacred ground. Our ancestors are buried in this soil." The debate raged for hours, with no clear solution emerging. The enemy was too strong to fight, but retreat would mean losing everything the tribe held dear. It was then that Chayton spoke up, his voice quiet, but carrying clearly through the council lodge. "There's another way," he said, "a way that might save both our people and our homeland." All eyes turned to him, some with skepticism, others with desperate hope. "I know the secret paths through the Badlands," Chayton continued, "trails that even our own scouts have forgotten. A small group of warriors could use those paths to circle around behind the enemy force." "And then what?" Windwalker asked. "A dozen men against 100? Not to fight them directly, Chayton explained. To stampede their horses in the night, scatter their supplies, create confusion and panic. If we can convince them that they're surrounded by a much larger force, they might retreat rather than risk a costly battle. It was a desperate plan, born of necessity rather than confidence. But it was also their only real chance. And I suppose you would lead the suicide mission? Standing Bear asked his son. If you'll let me, Chayton replied simply. I know those paths better than anyone. And if something goes wrong, well, you've already banished me. The tribe loses nothing if I don't return. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Finally, Windwalker spoke. It could work. If we could make them think they're facing a much larger force than they actually are. The risk is enormous, Strong pointed out. If the small group is discovered, they'll all be killed, and we'll still face the full enemy force. The risk of doing nothing is greater, Chayton said quietly. At least this way, we're fighting for our homeland instead of just running from it. After more debate, the council agreed to attempt Chayton's plan. 11 volunteers stepped forward to join the dangerous mission. More men than Chayton had hoped for, but far fewer than he would preferred. As the war party prepared to depart, Standing Bear pulled his son aside one final time. Chayton, the old chief, said, If you survive this night, your banishment will be lifted. What you are doing, it is the act of a true Lakota warrior. Chayton felt tears sting his eyes. Thank you, Father. But even if I don't survive, knowing that our people are safe will be enough. The journey through the Badlands was treacherous even for someone who knew the paths. Chayton led his small band through narrow canyons and across crumbling rock formations, following routes that existed more in memory than in any visible trail. Several times, warriors behind him whispered that they were lost, that the paths he was following led nowhere. But Chayton pressed on, guided by landmarks he remembered from childhood explorations. A lightning-struck tree here, an oddly shaped rock formation there. Just after midnight, they reached their destination, a high ridge overlooking the enemy camp. The sight below was both encouraging and terrifying. The enemy warriors were confident enough in their overwhelming numbers that they had posted only a few sentries. Their horses were bunched together in a makeshift corral, perfect for stampeding. But there were so many of them, nearly 100 sleeping warriors, anyone of whom could raise an alarm that would mean death for Chayton's small band. Remember, Chayton whispered to his men, we're not trying to defeat them. We're trying to convince them that they're facing a much larger force. Make noise, shoot arrows from different positions, shout war cries that sound like they're coming from all directions. The attack began with Windwalker's arrow taking down the furthest sentry in complete silence. Then Chayton and 2 others crept down to the horse corral, while the rest of the war party positioned themselves around the perimeter of the enemy camp. On Chayton's signal, the call of night bird, chaos erupted. The Lakota warriors struck the horse corral with flaming brands, sending the panicked animals stampeding directly through the center of the enemy camp. At the same time, arrows began flying for what seemed like dozens of different positions, and war cries echoed from every direction. In the darkness and confusion, the enemy warriors couldn't tell how many attackers they faced. Horses trampled supplies and knocked down shelters. Men stumbled over each other trying to find their weapons and organize a defense. For nearly an hour, Chayton's tiny force kept up the assault, moving constantly to create the illusion of a much larger attacking force. They set fire to supply caches, scattered remaining horses, and maintained a steady barrage of arrows and war cries. But gradually, the enemy leaders began to restore order. As dawn approached, it became clear that the deception couldn't be maintained much longer. That was when disaster struck. Young Two Hawks, one of the volunteers who had joined Chayton's mission, became separated from the main group in the darkness. As he tried to rejoin them, he stumbled directly into a group of enemy warriors who had been sent to investigate the source of the attacks. His death cry echoed across the canyon, and suddenly the enemy knew exactly where at least some of their attackers were located. Fall back! Chayton shouted to his men, but it was too late. A wave of enemy warriors was already charging up the slope toward their position, their superior numbers making retreat impossible. This was the moment Chayton had been dreading. The moment when his plan failed and his people would pay the price for his limitations. But as he drew his knife and prepared to sell his life as dearly as possible, something extraordinary happened. From high above, a sound split the dawn air that made every warrior on both sides freeze in recognition and awe. The cry of the golden eagle. Chayton looked up to see a magnificent bird circling overhead, its calls echoing off the canyon walls. And then another eagle appeared, and another. Within moments, the sky was filled with eagles, dozens of them, more than anyone had ever seen gathered in one place. The enemy warriors stared upward in terror, many of them dropping their weapons. In the traditions of every Plains tribe, such a gathering of eagles could only mean one thing. The spirits themselves had taken sides in this battle. And then Chayton heard it, faint at first, but growing stronger, the voice of the great eagle spirit. "Chayton, son of Standing Bear," the voice said, "you have learned the true meaning of sacrifice. You have put your people's welfare above your own pride. The connection is restored." Suddenly, Chayton could see through the eyes of every eagle circling above. He could sense their thoughts, understand their movements. But more importantly, he could use their presence to complete the deception he had started. Warriors of Crow, Shoshone, and Pawnee. Chayton called out in a voice that carried across the entire canyon. "You see the eagles gathering above us. The Great Spirit has sent them to witness your defeat. You face not just a Lakota, but the power of the spirit world itself." The psychological impact was devastating. Already shaken by the night-long assault and the mysterious appearance of so many eagles, the enemy warriors began to break ranks. "This is a cursed place," one of the Crow leaders shouted. "The spirits protect our enemies. We should never have come here." "Look at the eagles," cried a Pawnee warrior. "They circle like vultures over a battlefield. This is a sign of our doom." Within minutes, what had been an organized war party became a panic retreat. The enemy warriors abandoned their remaining supplies and fled toward their distant homelands, convinced that they had nearly walked into a spiritual trap. As the dust settled and the enemy disappeared into the distance, Chayton found himself surrounded by a small band of warriors, all of them staring at him with a mixture of awe and confusion. "How did you know the eagles would come?" Windwalker asked. Chayton looked up at the magnificent birds still circling overhead, their calls now sounding like songs of victory rather than warnings of war. "I didn't," he said honestly. I think they came because this time I was fighting for the right reasons." The journey back to the tribal camp was like a victory parade. Word of the enemy's retreat had already reached the village, carried by scouts who had witnessed the supernatural gathering of eagles and the panic flight of the war party. But for Chayton, the greatest moment came when he saw his father waiting at the edge of the camp. Chief Standing Bear stepped forward as his son approached, and without a word, the old leader placed his hands on Chayton's shoulders. "Welcome home, my son," Standing Bear said simply. As the tribe celebrated their deliverance from what had seemed certain destruction, Chayton found himself thinking about the lessons he had learned. The eagles still spoke to him, but their voices carried a different tone now. Not the casual chatter of old friends, but the respectful communication between spiritual allies. He understood now that his gift had never been about making him special or superior. It had been about serving his people, protecting them, and maintaining the balance between the physical and spiritual worlds. Years passed, and Chayton grew into the leader his father had always hoped he would become. He used his connection with the eagles wisely, always remembering that power without humility was just another form of weakness. When Chief Standing Bear finally passed on to the spirit world, the tribal council unanimously chose Chayton to succeed him. Under his leadership, the Lakota band prospered and grew, always protected by the wisdom that came from above and guided by the hard-earned knowledge that true strength came from serving others rather than dominating them. And sometimes, when young warriors came to him seeking wisdom about leadership and power, Chayton would tell them the story of his banishment and redemption. He would remind them that the greatest gifts from the spirit world were not meant to elevate the receiver, but to enable them to lift up everyone around them. The eagles still circle above the sacred lands of Lakota, and their descendants still remember the chief who spoke with them. But more importantly, they remember the lesson his story teaches. That pride may make us feel powerful, but only humility can make us truly strong. This is the way of the eagle spirit. This is the way of the Lakota. And this is how one young man's journey from arrogance to wisdom became a legend that guides leaders to this day.